Hello, my name is Brianna, and welcome to our country wiki on Australia. Although I'm pretty sure you're all familiar with Australia, I hope the brief overview of Australia's economy, geography, and even Hofstede's cultural dimensions gave you a little more background information as we begin our presentations. This presentation will mainly focus on oral and nonverbal communication within Australia. To begin, Australia has a population of roughly 22,751,041 people, according to the July 2015 estimate from the CIA World Factbook. Of this population of almost 23 million people, 76.8% are English speakers, which with the next largest language group being Mandarin speakers, 1.6%, and Italian speakers, which is 1.4%, and so on and so forth. With so many English speakers, one might think it would be very similar to the United States. However, that isn't quite the case. Australian English has a long and varied history, stretching back to 1788, when the British first claimed Australia as their island jail, to help solve their problem of overflowing prisons. Although there was already an Aboriginal population there, the new settlers were primarily of British, Irish, and Scottish origins. These settlers had a wide range of background dialects and languages, such as Gaelic, which influenced the English that became their common ground. Additionally, as this initial community began to merge with the existing Aboriginal population, we also began to see a lot of Indigenous influence in the new Australian English. For example, the names of many places and animals in Australia, such as kangaroos and wallaby, originate from Aboriginal dialects. Even the phrase hard yakka, which is a popular Australian phrase, that means hard work, is directly derived from the Jagira language, which is an indigenous language. If you'd like to check out some more examples of Australian words and their so-called definitions, check out this glossary from A to Z. Aside from the origins of the actual words in Australian English, we can also see several differences in Australian pronunciation, more than just their accent. While the sounds may sound similar to Cockney English, which also brings us back to the roots of the British working class English, there are also different rules of thumb to consider. In Australian English, it's customary to contract any word, or even a phrase for that matter, that may have more than two syllables. A good example for this would be how Australians often say good day rather than good day, like two words. Another good example would be how Australians say ute rather than utility. And here, utility doesn't even refer to things like water and electricity like we might normally think of in the US. Rather, utility refers to a truck, like a sport utility vehicle or SUV. If you'd like to hear more about these contracted words or phrases, or if you'd rather just hear something with a real a real Australian accent, feel free to check out this YouTube video, How to Speak Australian, the top 10 Aussie survival words. Okay, so now that we have the general gist of how Australians speak with both words and pronunciations, what about Australian conversations? Interestingly enough, the Canadian government offers a really great cultural resource that provides a Q&A with respective locals for topics such as this for almost every country in the world. According to the interviewed locals, one of the most important aspects of conversation in Australia is genuineness. In both business and casual settings, the most important thing to consider is to be yourself when conversing, as Australians tend to have a good sense for genuineness and will respect you for that, regardless of your background. In keeping with this theme, Australians also tend to be really interested in your story. So some easy conversation topics would be things like, where are you from? Or where do you live now? Or how did you find yourself in Australia? What do you do? Um, and although Australia is a modern, open, and culturally mixed society, it's still safe to say that you're better off skipping controversial topics such as religion or politics, especially in a business or professional setting. While topics such as religion or politics can be controversial in almost any culture, one topic specific to Australian culture that would be safer to avoid is Aboriginal issues or Native Australian issues. In fact, the Canadian government website even suggested that if this topic is brought up in conversation, the safest response is to act startled, regardless of what is said or who said what. So, as we already established, tone is very important when conversing in Australia, as Australians do tend to take note of genuineness, especially when they're conversing with out-of-towners. Another thing that's really important to take note of is the level of positivity in your language and in how you express yourself. The Australian Queensland government even stresses the importance of using positive language in managing business relationships in Australia. Aside from the fact that positive language overall is more encouraging, you're also more likely to achieve a positive outcome when you start with positive language. For example, the concept of win-win negotiating is really popular in Australia, as people there tend to respond really well to the idea of business deals and contracts that help all of the involved parties rather than policies that would pressure business or be inflexible. Yet another aspect of uh, Australian communication style is directness. As this also reminds us of the importance of being genuine, in Australia, people tend to say what they mean. There's no need to read between the lines. In fact, others can often interpret Australians to be blunt, since Australians value honesty and directness over diplomacy or being politically correct. In keeping with the importance of being direct, Australia is also a low context culture. Thus, you're not only expected to say what you mean, but you're expected to say everything. In conversation or in business context, you should not assume that the other person has background knowledge on the topic. Australians consider it important to include all facets of the message when communicating. In fact, failing to be direct or failing to include any aspect of the message can be interpreted by native Australians as being evasive or even being a hypocrite. So, as a low context culture where everything needs to be spelled out, it can be easy to overlook the nonverbal aspects of communication. However, the nonverbal aspects of communication are just as important, as there are cultural nuances to notice that can make or break any encounter. For example, Australians, like many other cultures, place a heavy emphasis on body language. As positivity was shown to be important in verbal communication, it is also just as important in nonverbal communication. One can show they're positive in body language by making sure they have an open posture, that they are facing the person they're speaking to, and that they're leaning in to show their interest. Another aspect of our body language that we have to consider is our gestures. Continuing the idea of portraying positive body language, is important that we include gestures such as nodding our head when conversing, leaving our palms open would also lend itself to be interpreted positively as well. And as we think about the type of body language that is received positively, we also have to think about what kind of body language is perceived negatively. For example, a popular gesture in the United States is the thumbs up. The thumbs up gesture in the US tends to be a positive gesture that implies all is well or everything is okay. although it can be interpreted negatively depending on the rest of your body language. Have to throw that out there. However, in Australia, the thumbs up gesture is more commonly interpreted to be a rude gesture. Rather, if someone wants to indicate that everything is okay, it's more appropriate to gesture a circle with your thumb and your pointer finger with your remaining fingers extended. Like I have the emojis over here to kind of show that for you. And last but not least, we also have to consider personal space when looking at the nonverbal aspects of communication. In Australia, and much like in the US, we must have a conscious respect for one another's personal space when we're interacting. For example, when greeting one another, a friendly handshake is considered an appropriate greeting. However, close female friends may find themselves hugging as another appropriate greeting, while close male friends are usually satisfied with a quick pat on the back. Personal space is also to be considered beyond your initial greeting. It's important not to stand too close to the people when conversing, as that quickly make them feel uncomfortable in both professional and personal situations. So there we have it. I hope you enjoyed this brief overview of oral and nonverbal communication in Australia. And if you have any questions, just let me know. Thanks for listening and have fun with the rest of our country wiki.